When the world goes quiet, some voices still remain. Not every soul finds peace when the clock strikes 12. There are stories hidden in the shadows, whispers drifting between the living and the forgotten. Some stories linger, some souls don't leave. Welcome to Stillness After Midnight, where every silence tells a story. If you're drawn to the mysteries that stir after dark, the voices that echo when the world sleeps, subscribe now and join us as we listen to the souls who still have something to say, because in the stillness, the truth finally speaks. They say every theater has its ghost. Some whisper of footsteps behind the curtains long after the actors have gone. Others claim the echoes of songs never truly leave the wooden stage, that the boards remember each word spoken upon them. But there was one story I heard in the northern provinces of China, one I cannot forget, no matter how many years have passed. It was told to me not as a fable, but as a confession passed down from lips that trembled like a dying flame. It begins with a mask, not the kind sold in market stalls to amuse tourists, nor the finely lacquered opera masks that dazzle under lantern light. This one was carved from dark wood, rough yet alive, as though the tree itself had not consented to be cut. The face bore no smile, no sorrow, only a cruel curve of lips and eyes that seemed to watch. They called it a relic of performance, but the old man who told me the tale lowered his voice when he said, "It was never meant for acting, it was meant for sealing." The mask, they said, once belonged to a performer consumed by his own pride. On stage, he mocked even the gods, believing applause could shield him from consequence. He vanished in fire, yet his face lingered, burned into that mask, waiting for the next hand foolish enough to wear it. And someone did. His name was Wei Liang, a man of the opera. Once celebrated, later forgotten, he longed for the glow of lanterns upon his skin again, for thunderous applause to remind him he was alive. In his hunger for recognition, he found the mask, or perhaps it found him. I tell you this not as entertainment, nor as a superstition to laugh at. I tell you because the mask has a way of returning, of finding new faces to inhabit. The wood does not decay, the eyes do not dim. If you listen closely, when the night is quiet and the wind presses against your door, you might hear it too, the faint scrape of wood against skin, the breath of a man who no longer owns his face. The mask waits. I first heard his name spoken in a tea house, half in jest and half in fear. Wei Liang. At that time, it was already a name tinged with dust and rumor, belonging to an actor whose glory had burned brightly before dimming into obscurity. Yet to those who had once seen him upon the stage, his voice was unforgettable, a sound that could swell like thunder or drop into whispers softer than incense smoke. Wei Liang had lived his life beneath painted lanterns. He was a master of the opera, the sharp fall of his sleeves, the arch of his brow, the heavy rhythm of his wooden shoes against the stage, all spoke of discipline and fire. But like all flames, his brilliance consumed itself. Younger actors rose, eager to mimic his style and surpass it. Theaters that once begged for his presence turned their gaze elsewhere. By the time his hair had streaked with gray, Wei Liang performed only in dim village halls, where the audience's applause was thin and distracted. I cannot say if bitterness or sorrow drove him further. Perhaps it was both. Perhaps it was simply hunger, the hunger of a man who could not live without eyes upon him. Fame, once tasted, lingers like wine on the tongue. Even when it sours, one cannot forget its sweetness. It was in one of those forgotten villages, on the road between the mountains and the river, that Wei Liang's story began to twist. He had taken shelter during a heavy storm, and there he wandered into a narrow lane, where even the rain seemed reluctant to enter. An old shop crouched there, its wooden sign cracked, the words half erased by time. Inside, beneath shelves of moth-eaten robes and chipped porcelain, he found it, the mask. It hung on the wall as though waiting. Its wood was dark, as if stained by smoke, and its features were carved too sharply to be human. The eyes were hollow, yet when Wei Liang stepped closer, he swore they shifted, catching the faint glow of the oil lamp above. "Not for sale," croaked the shopkeeper, his voice rough like gravel. But Wei Liang had already reached for it, his fingertips brushing the cool surface. "I am an actor," he said. "A mask is my instrument." The old man's expression tightened, though I was told one could not tell if it was fear or pity. "That mask is not for your kind of stage," he murmured. "It was meant to keep something inside, not to let it out." Wei Liang laughed, a weary sound but still proud. He pressed silver into the man's hand. The shopkeeper did not argue further. Perhaps he was too tired to resist, or perhaps he was relieved to see the cursed thing leave his wall. Wei Liang returned to his troupe with the mask tucked beneath his robe. No one else saw it that night, though some swore they heard a second pair of footsteps behind him as he walked home. The rain had ceased, yet drops fell from nowhere, pattering onto the ground with each of his steps. When he unveiled the mask to his companions, there was silence. Its features were grotesque, yet compelling. It bore no paint, no color, yet seemed alive. One actor muttered that it looked like a demon from temple murals. Another refused to look at it altogether. Wei Liang only smiled. "On stage, a mask must capture the soul. This one will make them see me again." The first night he wore it was in a crumbling theater lit by red lanterns. The audience was small, peasants, merchants, a few weary travelers. But when he stepped onto the stage, the hall grew hushed. The mask clung cold against his skin, and for a moment he felt his own breath echo inside it, as though he were sharing air with another. Then he performed. His movements sharpened, his voice deepened. When he struck the floor with his wooden shoes, the sound reverberated like a war drum. Each gesture carried a weight that silenced even the restless children in the crowd. Some said it was as though an ancient spirit had taken the stage, one who had waited centuries to speak again. When the performance ended, the applause was thunderous. Wei Liang bowed deeply, but the mask did not move with him. It grinned, lips curving wider than before. Later, when he returned to his chamber and removed it, Wei Liang caught sight of himself in the mirror. His face seemed blurred, like ink smeared across parchment. His features wavered, refusing to settle. He blinked, and his reflection sharpened again, though his eyes burned red at the corners. He told himself it was fatigue. The mask was only wood after all. Yet that night, when he closed his eyes, he dreamed of standing on a stage where the seats stretched endlessly into darkness. A sea of faces stared back at him, but they had no mouths, no eyes, only smooth wood. They clapped in unison, their hands striking in a hollow rhythm, and with each clap his skin felt thinner, as though it were being worn away. In the days that followed, his fame began to stir once more. Word spread of his uncanny performance. Audiences returned, drawn by something they could not name. Critics called his acting too real, as if the boundaries between man and role had dissolved. Wei Liang basked in their praise, though he could not rid himself of the memory of the mask's cold smile. Once, alone in the theater after rehearsal, he thought he heard the sound of wooden shoes striking the boards behind him. He turned, but the stage was empty. The red lanterns swayed, though there was no breeze. Another time, as he set the mask upon its stand, he swore he heard it breathe. I recount these details as they were told to me, not as superstition, but as fragments of a truth that still lingers in the silence of abandoned theaters. Every story has a beginning, but Wei Liang's began with a curtain that never wished to close, with a mask that did not wish to be set aside. And if you listen carefully, if you let the silence of the stage sink into your bones, you may hear it still, the faint echo of applause for a man who no longer owned his face. It was after the third performance that people began to whisper that Wei Liang had been reborn. The old critics who had long abandoned his shows returned, eyes wide with disbelief. They claimed he had discovered some new discipline, a secret art that allowed his body to move with such precision and terror that even seasoned actors paled beside him. Some called it talent rekindled. Others, more quietly, called it possession. I had not seen the performance myself, but I was told how the mask glistened under the lanterns as though coated in sweat, though it was nothing but dry wood. His voice, once frayed by years of shouting, was suddenly resonant, commanding, capable of slipping from a whisper into a roar that froze the audience in place. But what unsettled those who watched most was not his skill. It was the mask. When Wei Liang bowed, its lips curved too far. When he turned his head, its eyes seemed to follow the crowd, gleaming faintly even where no light should touch. Wei Liang himself felt it too, though he did not speak of it at first. In the dressing room, when he leaned close to the mirror, he noticed how the mask no longer sat stiffly on his face. It had begun to cling, the edges pressed tight against his skin, as if it had grown roots into his pores. When he tugged it free, it released with a faint wet sound, like fabric torn from damp wood. And beneath, his reflection wavered. At first it was small, the line of his jaw softer than he remembered, the skin mottled in patches of gray. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, told himself it was the poor oil light playing tricks. Yet each time he removed the mask, his face appeared less his own. He grew to dread the moments after a performance, when the applause faded and he found himself alone with the mirror. The silence pressed against his ears. He swore he heard something still clapping, far away, in rhythm with his heartbeat. There is a story told among stagehands that one night after rehearsal, a young boy who swept the floors lingered too long in the back. He saw Wei Liang rehearsing in full costume, the mask strapped to his face though no audience waited. The boy said Wei Liang did not speak the lines. The mask did. Its mouth shifted, though Wei Liang's lips beneath were still. Words poured out, deep and guttural, in a tongue the boy did not know. The boy fled before the rehearsal ended, dropping his broom. The next morning he refused to return. Wei Liang dismissed it as gossip, but inside he knew the truth. Sometimes when he wore the mask, he did not remember whole passages of his performances. He would wake, drenched in sweat, hearing only the roar of applause, though he could not recall the words that had left his throat. One evening his wife Wei Liang came to watch him. She had always been his most loyal companion, even when the world forgot his name. She sat quietly among the crowd, her face pale beneath the glow of lanterns. After the show, she entered his chamber. Wei Liang, still wearing the mask, turned to her with joy. But she did not step forward. Her hands trembled at her sides. "Liang," she whispered, "why do your eyes look like that?" He reached up and tore the mask away, but Wei Liang recoiled. "It is not only when you wear it," she said. "Even now, your eyes, they are not yours." Wei Liang looked into the mirror. His eyes stared back, rimmed in red, the whites veined like cracks in porcelain. He tried to smile, but the expression wavered, twisting into something cruel before he forced it straight again. That night she refused to sleep beside him. The mask began to hunger for more time. At first he wore it only on stage, but then he found himself slipping it on in the quiet hours, when the house was still. The wood pressed cold against his cheeks, and suddenly he felt alive, as though an audience waited beyond the darkness. He walked through the empty theater in silence, the wooden boards creaking beneath his shoes. The lanterns guttered, shadows thickened behind the curtains, and sometimes when he spoke aloud, he heard another voice echo his words a heartbeat later. He told himself it was imagination, yet when he removed the mask, hours had passed though he had thought only moments gone. One memory, relayed to me by a fellow actor, still chills me. During rehearsal, Wei Liang performed a scene of death, where the hero is struck and falls. As he collapsed, the mask tilted up toward the rafters. For a moment, the entire troupe saw the wood glisten with a sheen that looked like blood. When they rushed to help him, Wei Liang rose laughing, insisting it was only sweat. But one actress fainted, swearing she had seen the mask's lips move, even as Wei Liang lay silent. By then, his fame had returned in full. Crowds filled the theater. Word spread across provinces. They came not only for his skill, but for the unease it inspired, the way he seemed both man and something more. And Wei Liang, though haunted by his reflection, could not let it go. The applause was too intoxicating, the lanterns too warm. For a man who had once feared he would die forgotten, the mask was a miracle, a cruel salvation. Yet salvation has its price. Each time he removed the mask, more of his face blurred. Once, when he leaned close to the mirror, he saw the faint outline of the mask's grin etched into his own skin, vanishing only when he blinked. Another night, he woke to find the mask already upon his face, though he swore he had set it aside before sleep. He began to dream of fire, always fire, the stage burning, the curtains curling into ash, the audience clapping in unison even as the roof fell in flames. He would wake gasping, his lips tasting of smoke, his sheets damp as though from rain. I tell you all this not as idle tale. When people say Wei Liang's mask made him great again, they do not know what it took in return. For what he gave up was not his talent, nor even his sanity. What the mask demanded, piece by piece, was his face. And when a man loses his face, what is left of him? They say a theater is never truly empty. Even after the last audience member departs and the last lantern is snuffed out, something lingers. The boards still hum with footsteps. The curtains sigh as though catching their breath. I had often believed such sayings were only the sentiment of actors too attached to their craft. But after hearing of Wei Liang's nights in the theater, I began to think otherwise. The mask had become his companion long after the audience dispersed. He lingered beneath the red lanterns, rehearsing alone, the wood pressed against his skin, and in that silence the theater seemed to awaken in ways it never had before. It began with footsteps, a faint tock, 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 as if wooden shoes crossed the stage just beyond sight. At first, Wei Liang assumed one of the stagehands had returned. Yet when he called out, no one answered. The sound would pause, then resume, always just behind the curtain. One night, when he pulled the curtain aside, there was nothing but shadows. Yet he swore he saw the faint shape of a figure slip into the darkness. A flash of a sleeve too long to belong to any living man. Then came the whispers. They were not words at first, only sighs, as though the air itself had grown weary. But over time, the whispers sharpened. They spoke lines from plays. Lines Wei Liang himself had performed decades earlier, roles he had long forgotten. Imagine hearing your own voice in the dark, repeating verses you no longer remembered. That is what haunted him. The whispers spoke with the cadence of opera, tones rising and falling with uncanny perfection. Sometimes the whispers came from the balcony, other times from beneath the floorboards. Once Wei Liang leaned close to the mask's hollow eyes and realized, terrified, that the whispers were not echoing in the room. They were seeping out from the mask itself. His fellow actors began to notice as well. During one rehearsal, a lantern flickered, sputtering smoke instead of flame. As they relit it, they heard laughter, soft, high, brittle, like porcelain cracking. The laughter did not belong to any of them. Another night, one of the younger actresses fell asleep backstage. She woke screaming, claiming a face had leaned over her in the dark. Not Wei Liang's, but a wooden visage with eyes that glowed faintly red. She refused to return the next day. One by one, the troupe began to leave. Stage hands muttered of shadows moving in the rafters. Props were found overturned, though no one had touched them. The theater itself grew restless, its silence heavy, oppressive. Yet the audiences kept coming. They filled the hall, eager for Wei Liang's performance. They had not heard the whispers. They did not feel the way the air thickened before he stepped onto the stage, or how the red lanterns dimmed as though bowing to a greater presence. Wei Liang wore the mask proudly, as though daring anyone to doubt him. But inside, he felt it breathing. He never told anyone, but sometimes when the mask pressed against his face, he felt warm air against his lips, as if someone on the other side were exhaling into him. One memory remains vivid in my retelling. During a performance, as Wei Liang sang a sorrowful aria, the mask tilted toward the lanterns. The flame inside one lantern elongated, stretching unnaturally high until it blackened the glass. A shadow formed on the wall, taller than any man, its limbs impossibly long. It swayed as he sang, as though dancing with him. The audience applauded, thinking it part of the act. But backstage, those who saw swore they smelled burning wood and incense, as though a funeral pyre had been lit. Wei Liang's wife, Mei Lin, grew more frightened by the day. She pleaded with him to abandon the mask. "It is not art, Liang," she begged. "It is not even you. When you wear it, I do not recognize the man beneath." But Wei Liang could not let go. "The mask has given me back what the world stole," he insisted. "Without it, I am nothing but an old man with a fading voice." She wept, but her tears could not soften the mask's grin. At times, Wei Liang tried to resist it. He left the mask in its box, locked away. Yet at night he would hear the whispers call him Liang, Liang, always from behind the curtain, always accompanied by that hollow talk, talk, talk of unseen footsteps. He would rise from his bed trembling and find himself before the theater again. Somehow the box would be open, the mask waiting, and when he placed it against his face, the silence would vanish, replaced by the thunder of phantom applause. The whispers grew bolder. During one rehearsal, a voice hissed from the darkness, "Your face is fading. Ours is eternal." Wei Liang froze, his throat dry. None of the others reacted. To them, the theater was silent. To him, it was alive. Another night, he swore the whispers mocked him, repeating his vows of youth. "I will be remembered. I will not fade. I will live forever on the stage." And the laughter that followed was his own, yet twisted, cruel. I was told there came a night when Wei Liang performed alone, without audience, without troupe. He sang into the void, his voice breaking. The lanterns swayed though there was no wind, and from the shadows applause rose, slow, deliberate, countless hands striking in rhythm. But when he peered into the seats, they were empty, every chair vacant, every balcony bare. Yet the sound grew louder until it roared in his skull. He tore the mask away, desperate, but the applause did not stop. Only when he collapsed to the floor, trembling, did the silence return. And in that silence, he heard a final whisper. "The curtain never closes." From that night on, Wei Liang was no longer merely haunted by the mask. He was bound to it. The whispers behind the lanterns followed him everywhere. And though he still drew crowds with his art, he had begun to understand. The mask had not come to serve him. It had come to own him. It is said that every bargain has two signatures, one written by the hand and the other written by the soul. Wei Liang never signed a contract in ink. Yet by the time the fourth month passed, the shadows themselves bore witness to an agreement no mortal pen could undo. The mask no longer waited politely in its box. When Wei Liang returned home from the theater, he would often find it resting on the table, though he swore he had locked it away. Some nights he woke from shallow sleep to find it lying beside his pillow, its hollow eyes fixed upon him in the dim glow of the moon. Once he dreamed of water dripping in an endless corridor. Each drop echoed like footsteps. At the corridor's end, the mask floated in the dark, its grin stretching wide. When he awoke, his face was damp, as if something cold and wet had pressed against him. The mask sat on his chest, heavier than stone. And yet the fame it brought was undeniable. Audiences came from far provinces, whispering that Wei Liang's art had touched the other world. He no longer played characters, he became them. His cries of sorrow shook hearts. His fury left crowds trembling. They called him immortal, reborn, chosen. But when the performance ended, Wei Liang staggered from the stage, drained as though each show pulled marrow from his bones. His skin grew pale, waxen. The lines of his face blurred like fading brushstrokes. In their place, faint ridges formed, as though carved by a knife. One evening, while removing the mask, he realized the marks aligned perfectly with its features. Mei Lin, watching him from the doorway, gasped. "Liang," she whispered, "your skin. It looks like wood." Wei Liang turned sharply toward her. The lamplight caught his face, and for a fleeting instant, his cheek gleamed like polished lacquer. He covered it quickly, snarling, "It is only exhaustion." But she did not believe him. Her eyes brimmed with tears as she whispered, "You are not the man I married." Her words echoed in the silence, and for the first time, Wei Liang felt the mask stir in his hands. Warm, almost affectionate, as if it too claimed him. The contract was sealed not with ink, but with hunger. Every time he donned the mask, he felt it pressing deeper, its edges cutting faintly, drawing blood that vanished as soon as it touched the wood. And every time he performed, the mask gave him life, yet demanded something in return. He began to hear its voice more clearly. Not whispers, not sighs, words. "You wished for glory. You wished for applause. I can give you eternity." Wei Liang trembled. "And what will you take?" The mask chuckled, hollow and cold. "Only what you no longer need." He tried once to resist, to refuse a performance. The troupe begged him. An audience had gathered, nobles among them. Wei Liang, trembling, left the mask behind, determined to prove he could still act without it. But when he stepped on stage barefaced, his voice cracked. His movements faltered. The hall grew restless, the murmurs of disappointment rising like a storm. Panic burned in his chest. He looked toward the wings, and there it was, hanging in the shadows, though he had left it in his home. Its hollow eyes beckoned. Its lips seemed to twitch, and Wei Liang broke. He snatched it, pressed it against his face. The hall gasped, then fell silent as his voice roared, flawless, terrible, transcendent. From that moment on, he understood. He no longer wore the mask. The mask wore him. The others saw it too. One actor swore that during rehearsal, the mask shifted on its own, widening its grin as if savoring the lines. Another claimed that when Wei Liang removed it, his eyes lingered black for several breaths before color returned. The stagehand spoke of shadows too thick, stretching unnaturally long when he stood in the lantern light. Once, as he crossed the boards, his shadow split into two, one moving a heartbeat slower than the other. Wei Liang's fame reached its peak, yet at home his world crumbled. Meilin refused to touch him. "The man I see is no longer my husband," she said, her voice breaking. "You are being hollowed out." He begged her to understand. "This is who I must be. Without the stage, I am nothing." But she shook her head. "No, Liang. Without your face, you are nothing." Her words cut deeper than any blade. Yet that night, as he held the mask close, he felt it whisper with something like comfort. "They will never leave you. They cannot. You are mine." The contract grew clearer each day. Wei Liang gained power, presence, immortality on stage. But off stage, he withered. He no longer saw his reflection in the mirror, only a blur, a shifting outline, sometimes replaced by the mask itself staring back at him. The world applauded his art, yet his home grew silent. Meilin avoided his gaze. The servants fled. Even his child whimpered at his approach, clinging to his mother's skirts. Still, Wei Liang could not stop. The applause was too sweet, the fame too blinding. One night after a triumphant performance, he returned to his chamber to find a parchment upon his table. It bore no writing, only the faint outline of a handprint charred into the surface. When he touched it, the mask stirred against his chest. He heard the voice again, clear, sharp. "All contracts must be signed. You have already given me your face. Soon you will give me more." Wei Liang dropped the parchment, heart pounding. But when he blinked, it was gone. Only the mask remained, grinning. The contract was no longer a metaphor. It was binding. Wei Liang had not signed with ink, but with every performance, every breath, every moment he chose the mask over his own flesh. And deep inside he knew there would come a day when he could not remove it at all. I tell you this because such bargains are not rare. Men bargain with silence, with lies, with pride. But the cruelest contracts are those we sign without knowing, the ones written in shadows, sealed with whispers behind lantern light. Wei Liang's mask was not his first step into darkness. It was his binding oath. I once heard an elder say that the cruelest curse is not death, but being forgotten while still alive. For Wei Liang, that curse took shape not in silence or obscurity, but in the steady erasure of his own face. It began subtly, so subtly that only his wife noticed at first. Mei Lin had always been gentle in her words, but one morning she reached for him as the sunlight crept into their chamber, and she froze. "Liang," she whispered, "your skin. It does not catch the light." He rose to the mirror, heart pounding. There it was, his cheek blurred, as though the lines of his face had been smudged by an unseen hand. He rubbed it, splashed water, pinched his skin. For a moment the features sharpened again, but in her eyes he saw the truth. He was fading. That day, when he entered the marketplace, a child tugged at his mother's sleeve and asked, "Why does that man have no eyes?" The mother hushed the child quickly, but the words burned. Wei Liang touched his face in panic, only to find his eyes still there. Yet when he caught his reflection in a bronze mirror at a merchant's stall, the sockets were empty hollows. He staggered back. The merchant gave him a puzzled look, but said nothing. It seemed only he could see it. At the theater, the change deepened. The troupe had dwindled, most abandoning him, but a few remained, bound by coin or by fear. One actress, brave enough to apply his paint before a show, gasped as her brush skimmed his cheek. "It is like painting on wood," she muttered, recoiling. Wei Liang snatched the brush and dismissed her. Alone, he pressed his fingers to his skin. It was smooth, hard, unyielding, the texture of polished lacquer. His face no longer belonged to flesh. Mei Lin wept in secret. She begged him to abandon the mask. "Liang, I cannot watch you vanish piece by piece. Every time you wear it, less of you remains. Soon there will be nothing left but that thing." He held her hands, trembling. "But when I wear it, I am alive. I hear them. I feel them. Without it, I am no one." Her eyes searched his, and he knew she saw the truth he tried to hide. The eyes staring back were not his. That night she refused to sleep in the same bed. He heard her muffled sobs through the thin wall. The mask lay on his table, grinning in the lantern light. And for the first time, Wei Liang felt a pang of shame, yet still he reached for it. On stage, however, there was no shame, only triumph. Audiences swore they had never seen such realism. When he played a dying soldier, his skin paled as if drained of blood. When he played a grieving father, his face contorted with anguish so raw that grown men shuddered. What they did not know was that he no longer acted. The mask carved these emotions into him, sculpting his fading flesh into whatever shape it pleased. The crowd thought it brilliance. Wei Liang knew it was theft. One evening, after a performance that ended with thunderous applause, he returned to his chamber and attempted to remove the mask. But his fingers hesitated. For the first time, he realized he could not feel where his own skin ended and the mask began. When at last he tore it free, blood welled along the edges of his cheeks. He gasped, clutching at a cloth to wipe it away. But in the mirror there was no blood, only cracks in the surface of his face, like splintering wood. His child, creeping into the room with timid steps, saw him then. The boy's scream pierced the night. "Mother! That man! He is not father!" Mei Lin rushed in, pulling the child away, her eyes filled with horror. She did not deny the words. Wei Liang, trembling, tried to call out, "It is me!" But the voice that left his throat was deeper, harsher, as though two voices spoke at once. The next day, the boy refused to enter the same room as him. When Wei Liang bent to kiss his forehead, the child hid behind his mother, shaking violently. "The mask has eaten him," the boy whispered. Wei Liang's heart cracked. He staggered to the mirror, desperate to prove them wrong. Yet the reflection that stared back was no longer blurred. It was sharp, cruel, the masked face etched over his own. He raised trembling hands, clawing at his skin. But the wood-like surface did not yield. His fingernails scraped sparks of pain, yet the grin remained. That night he dreamed again of the endless theater. This time he was not on the stage. He was in the audience, surrounded by faceless figures clapping in unison. On stage stood the mask itself, enormous, its hollow eyes filled with fire. It bowed deeply, and the crowd roared with approval. When he woke, the mask was already on his face. He had not put it there. Wei Liang tried to confide in an old friend, another actor who had once shared the stage with him. He begged him to look closely to tell him what he saw. The friend paled. "Liang, your features are gone. Only the mask remains." Wei Liang shook him, desperate. "But can you not see my eyes? My mouth?" The man pulled free, trembling. "What eyes? What mouth? You are a shadow wearing wood." He fled and never returned. By then, rumors spread among the people. They said Wei Liang no longer removed the mask, even in the streets, that his face had been taken as payment for his talent. Some whispered he was not a man at all, but a spirit masquerading as one. And still, audiences came. Still, they applauded. The more his face vanished, the greater their hunger to see him. I cannot say which tormented him more, losing his family's love or gaining the adoration of strangers who would never know what price he paid. But I know this. Each time he stepped on stage, the mask smiled wider, and Wei Liang's true face receded further, like ink washed from paper until nothing remained. He was becoming the role he had once feared most, a man without a face. They say every hunger begins as a whisper, a small voice that insists, just one more taste, one more moment, and then you will be satisfied. But hunger never truly ends. It grows, devours, and reshapes the one who feeds it. By the time winter fell across the city, Wei Liang no longer feared the mask. He feared what happened when he tried to live without it. Without the mask, his reflection was a blur, his voice a husk, his skin ashen. He felt as if he were drifting through life, half dead, every movement slow, every breath shallow. The streets ignored him. People's eyes slid past him as though he were invisible. But the moment he placed the mask against his face, vitality surged. His chest expanded, his spine straightened, his voice thundered. He was seen, adored, alive. The mask had become more than a tool. It was sustenance. The whispers followed him everywhere now. No longer hidden in the corners of the theater, they spoke plainly, curling around his ears, seeping into his thoughts. "You are mine. You breathe because of me." At first he tried to argue. "I still have my own will. I choose when to wear you." The voice chuckled, hollow as a tomb. "Do you? Then leave me aside. Try to walk the streets without me. See how the world looks upon a man without a face." And he knew it was right. Mei Lin confronted him one last time. She entered his chamber as he sat before the mirror, the mask resting in his hands. Her face was gaunt from sleepless nights, her eyes rimmed with red. "Liang," she said, her voice breaking, "you must stop. Our son cries in terror. He does not know his father anymore." Wei Liang's hands trembled. "I only need it for the stage. Soon I will be finished. One more season, and then I will cast it aside." But as he spoke, the mask warmed, and the whisper hissed in his ear. "Lies. You will never cast me aside." Mei Lin flinched, as though she too had heard. She backed away, tears falling silently. "Then you are lost," she whispered, and left him. Wei Liang did not follow. He could not. The hunger deepened. Performances grew longer, more consuming. Audiences reported strange sensations. The scent of burning incense, though no sticks were lit. The sound of chanting beneath the music. The faint image of an extra figure moving just behind Wei Liang, though the stage was bare. One noble collapsed during a performance, claiming afterward that he saw the mask staring directly into his soul. He left the city the very next morning, swearing never to return. The theater brimmed with rumors. Some said the mask was alive, drinking the life of anyone who dared meet its gaze. Others whispered that Wei Liang had bargained with a demon, and each night was another installment of his debt. Wei Liang, meanwhile, began to feel the mask tightening. At first, it was only during performances, the wood pressing against his temples, his jaw aching as though bound. But soon, even when he removed it, the pressure remained. His face felt smaller, compressed, as if being carved into a new shape. Blood welled at the edges of his cheeks, not red but dark, sticky, almost black. Yet when it touched the mask, it was absorbed instantly, vanishing without a trace. He realized with horror the mask was feeding. The dreams returned, more vivid than ever. He stood on a burning stage, flames licking at the curtains, the smell of charred wood heavy in the air. The audience clapped in perfect rhythm, faceless figures whose hands struck like thunder. In the center, the mask floated above the stage, its grin splitting wider and wider until it seemed to swallow the world. He awoke choking on smoke, though his chamber was clear. The mask lay upon his chest, warm and pulsing like flesh. The troupe dwindled further. Only a handful remained, bound by desperation or fascination. One stagehand confided to another that when he brushed against Wei Liang backstage, he felt nothing human, only the cold surface of polished wood. Another swore that he saw Wei Liang remove the mask, yet beneath it, the same demonic face remained. "There is no man left," he whispered, "only the mask pretending." And yet the audiences grew. Crowds overflowed into the streets. People clawed for seats, desperate to witness the immortal actor. They spoke his name with reverence, never knowing that the man they adored no longer recognized himself. Wei Liang should have felt triumph. Instead, he felt hollow. The applause that once filled him now sounded distant, muffled, like rain against a coffin lid. The masked voice returned, soft and cruel. "Applause is not for you. It is for me. They worship the face I gave you, not the one you lost." One evening after the final bow, Wei Liang collapsed in his chamber. He tried to remove the mask, but it would not come free. He clawed, tore, screamed. His nails snapped against the wood. Blood slicked his fingers. But the mask clung tighter, pulsing, drinking. At last it loosened. He fell gasping, drenched in sweat. His reflection in the mirror grinned back, though he had no lips left to move. He realized then the hunger was endless. It would never stop at his face. Already he felt it in his chest, pressing, hollowing. Soon it would take his voice, his soul, his very being. And yet he knew he would return to it, because without it, he was nothing. I tell you this because hunger is a contract deeper than blood. You may believe you hold it in check, but the truth is cruel. Hunger always holds you. Wei Liang did not feed the mask. The mask fed him, and so he could never let it go. Desperation drives men to strange journeys. When Wei Liang could no longer bear the weight of the whispers, when even his own shadow seemed to sneer at him, he resolved to return to the place where it had begun. The winter had not yet loosened its grip when he set out. The roads were half buried in frost, the air sharp with the smell of pine and smoke. He traveled alone, for no companion would follow him now. His wife had fled with their son, the troop had scattered like frightened birds, and only the mask kept him company, nestled against his chest, whispering faintly as if amused by his pilgrimage. "Do you think you can leave me behind?" it murmured. "I have always been with you." Wei Liang pressed it tighter against his robe, shuddering. He did not answer. The village lay nestled between two hills, a forgotten place where even time seemed reluctant to linger. When last he had seen it, the alleys had been alive with merchants, the taverns noisy with drinkers. Now, as he walked its narrow lanes, silence greeted him. Shuttered windows, crumbling walls, and the faint smell of mildew spoke of abandonment. The shop where he had found the mask crouched at the end of a crooked street. Its wooden sign hung askew, the characters eaten by rot. The door sagged open, creaking as he pushed it aside. Inside was dust and ruin. Shelves collapsed under the weight of time. Spiders had spun curtains across corners. The counter where the old shopkeeper once sat was broken, its surface scarred as though by fire. The mask pulsed against his chest, warm. Wei Liang whispered hoarsely, "I am returning you. I will leave you here." But the room gave no reply, only silence, thick and oppressive. He wandered deeper, searching for any trace of the man who had sold it to him, but he found only ashes. In the back room lay a heap of charred wood, faint outlines of furniture long since burned. The scent of old smoke still clung to the air, bitter and choking. He asked the villagers what had happened. Few remained to answer. An old woman, her hair white as snow, shook her head when he inquired about the shopkeeper. "That man has been dead for 20 years, she said. The shop burned to the ground. They say he dealt in cursed objects, relics best left buried. One night, fire consumed the place. Some claim it was no accident, that the flames came from within." Wei Liang trembled. "But I spoke to him. I bought the mask." The woman's eyes narrowed, pity in her gaze. "Then it was not the living you met, but a ghost. The mask has always belonged to the dead." Wei Liang's knees weakened. He leaned against a wall, gasping. The mask throbbed in his chest like a second heart. The whisper curled in his ear, mocking. "Did you truly think you chose me? I chose you." He fled the woman's presence, stumbling through the narrow alleys until he reached the old temple at the edge of the village. The temple gates sagged, moss crawling up their pillars. Within, incense still burned faintly, though no monk tended the flames. He entered desperate, clutching the mask. Before the altar of a forgotten deity, he fell to his knees. "Release me," he begged. "I never asked for this. I only wanted to act, to live, to be remembered." The silence stretched. Then faintly he heard chanting, low, mournful, echoing through the rafters though no monks were present. Shadows flickered across the walls, shifting like dancers. A figure appeared, an old man robed in gray, his face lined with age. His eyes, however, gleamed with clarity. "You cannot unmake what you have embraced," the monk said. "The mask was never a prop. It was a prison. By wearing it, you broke the seal." Wei Liang bowed, trembling. "Tell me how to bind it again." The monk shook his head. "Such seals are forged with sacrifice, fire and flesh, blood and soul. The first man who wore it mocked the gods and was consumed by flames. His spirit was bound into wood so that none would repeat his folly. But you," he looked at Wei Liang with sorrow, "you freed him." The masked whisper rose, cruel and triumphant. "Do not listen. You belong to me now. The stage is eternal. Together we will never fade." Wei Liang pressed his hands to his ears, but the voice was inside him, vibrating in his skull. The monk stepped closer, placing a withered hand upon his shoulder. "You must choose. Either you surrender yourself, or you cast it into fire once more and accept what is lost. There is no return without sacrifice." That night, Wei Liang stayed in the temple, staring at the mask laid before him on the altar. Its hollow eyes caught the lantern's glow, and for a moment he saw his own reflection within. Faint, fading, almost gone. He whispered to himself, "If I destroy it, perhaps I destroy myself. If I keep it, I destroy all that I love." The mask seemed to smile wider. "You have no love left, only me." Wei Liang closed his eyes, tears burning his cheeks. The contract had never been about glory. It had always been about hunger, and hunger had no end. When dawn broke, he left the temple. Villagers saw him staggering down the road, clutching the mask tighter than ever. His eyes burned like embers. Some swore they saw smoke trailing behind him, though no fire had been lit. The village faded behind him, as all places of warning fade behind men who will not listen. The mask whispered softly, almost tenderly, "Home is the stage, and the stage is forever." And so Wei Liang returned, not freed, but more deeply bound. There are moments in a man's life when he clutches at the thinnest threads of hope, even when he knows they will snap. For Wei Liang, that hope took the form of a weary monk in a crumbling temple, a man said to have outlived dynasties and spoken with spirits. The monk's name was never given. People called him only the Keeper. His temple stood far beyond the rice fields, where the earth turned to stone and the wind carried the faint scent of incense even when no sticks were burning. Wei Liang arrived at dusk, his body bent, his eyes hollow. He clutched the mask close, though it pulsed with warmth as if alive. The monk greeted him not with surprise, but with a sigh, as though he had been waiting. "You have carried it too long," the monk said. His voice was low, dry as the crackle of old parchment. "The wood has eaten your flesh. Soon nothing will remain." Wei Liang fell to his knees. "Then help me. I beg you. Release me from it." The monk studied him with calm eyes, then turned toward the altar where ashes of past offerings lay piled high. "I will try, but understand this. Such bindings are not undone without a price. Ashes do not return to wood, nor burned flesh to skin." That night the ritual began. The temple was lit by dozens of oil lamps, their flames swaying like watchful eyes. The air grew thick with incense, coils of smoke drifting in twisting shapes. Wei Liang knelt before the altar, the mask resting on a bed of blackened ash. The monk chanted, syllables ancient and heavy, vibrating in the chest like the toll of a great bell. He cast salt in a circle around them, then scattered yellowed talismans across the floor. The symbols glowed faintly in the lamplight, lines of ink seeming to writhe like living things. Wei Liang closed his eyes as the monk's voice rose. The incense filled his lungs, stinging, choking. The mask trembled upon the ashes, its hollow eyes glinting with red fire. Then came the voice, louder than ever before. "Foolish old man, do you think your chance can silence me? He is mine. His face, his soul, his shadow. They belong to me." Wei Liang gasped, clutching his head. "Do not listen," the monk ordered. "It feeds on your fear." The chanting quickened. The air grew hot. Ashes stirred, though no wind touched them, swirling into shapes that almost resembled faces. Faces screaming in silence. Wei Liang felt the mask tug at him. Though it lay upon the altar, he felt it pulling, threads invisible but strong, binding his chest, his throat. His skin burned, cracking like dry wood. He cried out, clawing at his face. But the monk pressed a hand to his shoulder, steady. "Endure. It must burn away what it has claimed." The monk poured oil over the mask, then struck a flame. Fire leapt high, crackling, devouring the wood. For a heartbeat, Wei Liang saw hope, the mask blackening, curling at its edges. But then, impossibly, it screamed. The sound was not of wood splitting. It was a voice, deep and terrible, vibrating through the stones of the temple. The flames bent inward, sucked into the mask's hollow eyes. The fire did not consume it. It consumed the fire. In moments, the mask lay unscathed, its grin wider than before. Wei Liang sobbed. "Why won't it die?" The monk's face was grim. "Because it is no longer only wood. It is you. Your blood has fed it. Your soul has clothed it. To destroy it would be to destroy yourself." The mask's whisper turned tender, mocking. "You see now? We are one. There is no release." Wei Liang shook his head violently. "No! I will not be your puppet." The monk stepped forward, drawing a blade dulled by years. He etched lines of scripture into the floor, his voice straining with effort. "There is one way," he said. "Sacrifice. Fire may not consume it, but your flesh still can. Offer yourself, and it may be sealed again." Wei Liang froze, trembling. Sacrifice. His life in exchange for the stage's release. But the thought of death terrified him more than the mask itself. He saw the faceless audience in his dreams, clapping, eternal. Could he bear to vanish into silence, unknown, forgotten? The mask whispered, "Do not fear. With me you will never fade. You will perform forever." And Wei Liang, broken, believed. The ritual collapsed. The talismans blackened. The salt circles scattered as if blown apart by unseen hands. The monk staggered, coughing blood. "Then it is finished," he whispered. "You have chosen. The stage will burn again." Wei Liang grabbed the mask from the ashes. It was warm, pulsing. Without hesitation, he pressed it to his face. It fused instantly, sealing, his skin cracking to accept it. The monk turned away, sorrow in his eyes. You are no longer man. You are performance given form, and performance must end only in fire. When Wei Liang left the temple, dawn had broken. Yet the sun seemed dimmer, the sky bruised with strange colors. Birds did not sing. Even the wind stilled, as if the world held its breath. He walked back toward the city, the mask grinning, his footsteps echoing like drums. People who glimpsed him on the road swore shadows followed close behind, moving not quite in rhythm with his body. I tell you this because not all rituals end in salvation. Some only reveal the depth of the curse. Wei Liang sought release, but what he found was truth. He was no longer actor or man. He was the mask, and the mask hungered still. They say the stage is a sacred place. Once the curtain rises, all who stand upon it belong not to themselves, but to the story. For Wei Liang, that story had become a cage of fire, and the mask its author. The city had never seen such anticipation. Word spread like wildfire. Wei Liang was to perform a grand play, a retelling of an ancient tragedy. Nobles reserved entire rows. Peasants sold what little they owned for a chance to witness him. By dusk, the theater groaned beneath the weight of the crowd. Red lanterns swayed outside like hearts beating in the wind. Backstage, the air was heavy. The few remaining members of the troupe kept their distance from him, whispering among themselves. They had seen too much. The way his shadow split, the way his eyes gleamed when the mask clung tight. But none dared abandon him, not when the theater was packed, not when coin overflowed. Wei Liang stood before the mirror, though no reflection looked back. Only the masked grin, sharp and endless. His hands trembled as he tied it in place. The wood sealed against his skin with a sound like flesh knitting shut. The curtain rose. Gasps filled the hall as he stepped onto the stage. Dressed in crimson robes, sleeves long as rivers, he moved with a grace both beautiful and terrifying. His voice thundered, carrying every sorrow, every fury of the play. The audience leaned forward, entranced. Yet those nearest the stage swore they saw something strange. A second mouth moving beneath the mask, whispering lines before his own voice followed. Others claimed the lanterns dimmed, shadows crawling higher up the walls, as though the theater itself bowed to him. And then came the blood. The script demanded a scene of battle, a tragic fall. Wei Liang lifted his blade, striking the air. But as the steel glimmered, his opponent crumpled to the floor, gasping, blood seeping from his chest. The actor had not been touched. The wound appeared as if conjured, dark and spreading. The audience erupted. Some screamed, others applauded, believing it astonishing theater. Wei Liang himself froze, horrified until the mask whispered, "Do not stop. They love it." And so he continued. Each movement became sharper, more violent. His voice cracked into something inhuman. The stage boards groaned, splinters bursting like veins. When he stamped his wooden shoes, the sound echoed like war drums, rattling the hall. Actors fled mid-performance, dropping their props, yet the audience hardly noticed, their eyes fixed on him, unable to look away. Some laughed, others wept. The mask had ensnared them. One noble collapsed, clutching his chest. Another fainted, eyes rolled back. Still the crowd clapped, delirious, their hands striking in rhythm, unable to resist. The lanterns flared, then bled wax like tears. Shadows draped over the audience, swallowing their faces. From backstage, one witness swore that Wei Liang no longer moved as a man, but as a puppet pulled by strings of smoke. His arms jerked, his head snapped unnaturally. The masked grin widened with each motion. And then the climax. The script called for his character to die, pierced by betrayal. Instead, Wei Liang raised the blade to himself. Gasps rippled through the crowd, but the mask laughed, an echo heard by all. The blade plunged, but no wound appeared. Instead, crimson lines spread across the stage itself, trickling like veins through the wood. The boards drank greedily, darkening. Curtains shuddered, then stained red, as though soaked from within. Drops fell, pattering onto the stage like rain. Chaos erupted. Some screamed and fled, trampling over each other in desperation. Others remained seated, clapping mindlessly, eyes vacant, caught in the mask's thrall. Children wailed, mothers clutched them tight, but the applause would not stop. It rolled like thunder, drowning every cry. Wei Liang stood at the center, arms outstretched, robes billowing as though moved by a storm only he felt. The mask's voice boomed from his throat. The curtain will never close. The play will never end. You are all my audience, forever. The theater quaked. Dust fell from the rafters. A lantern burst, spilling flame across the boards. Fire leapt eagerly, licking the curtains, devouring the stage. Still the applause thundered. In the chaos, a single witness swore he saw Wei Liang's true face flicker beneath the mask, hollow, eyeless, begging silently for release. But in an instant it was gone, the mask sealing tighter than ever. As the flames consumed the hall, people fled into the night. Yet many remained trapped, frozen in their seats, clapping even as smoke choked them. Their eyes were glazed, their smiles too wide. Wei Liang danced among them, unstoppable, unstoppable, unstoppable. When dawn broke, the theater was ash. Among the ruins, only the mask was found, lying unburned upon the charred stage. No body of Wei Liang remained. No bones, no ash. Only the mask, its grin eternal. And some swear that if you lift it to your ear, you can still hear it. The faint rhythm of applause, endless, demanding. I tell you this because glory and horror share the same stage. Wei Liang sought immortality in applause, but applause became his prison. Curtains of blood marked the end of his art, and yet, even in ashes, the performance continues. Children have a way of seeing the truth adults refuse to face. Where we convince ourselves with excuses, they stare and recognize what is missing. For Wei Liang, it was his son who spoke the truth most clearly. That man is not father. The theater lay in ruins, yet the mask remained. Word spread that Wei Liang had perished in the fire, consumed like the cursed performer of legend. And yet, on certain nights, people swore they heard footsteps echoing through the burned husk of the hall. Red light flickered where no lantern hung. It was then his son returned, clutching Malin's hand. The boy had not spoken his father's name for weeks, but when whispers spread that Wei Liang's shadow lingered, he begged to see for himself. Malin resisted. No, child, he is gone. But the boy's eyes brimmed with tears. If he is gone, I must say goodbye. If he is not, I must remind him who he is. At last, with heavy heart, she led him. The night was windless. Ash still clung to the air, sharp with the scent of burned wood. The mother and child stepped into the ruin. The stage boards were blackened, cracked, yet somehow intact in places, as though the fire had spared what it wished. And there he was. Wei Liang stood at the center, robes tattered, mask gleaming untouched by soot. He moved slowly, swaying as if performing for an audience only he could see. Shadows writhed around him like dancers, clapping in silence. The boy cried out, "Father!" Wei Liang froze. His body shuddered. Slowly, his head turned. For a moment, silence. Then with a voice like two men speaking at once, he rasped, "Why have you come?" Malin pushed the boy behind her, trembling. But the child stepped forward bravely, his small hands clenched. "Because you are my father, and you promised you would never leave." The masked grin seemed to widen. A whisper hissed, "He is no longer yours, child. He belongs to me." Wei Liang staggered, clutching his face. Beneath the mask, his muffled cry broke through. "No, do not listen." The boy's eyes filled with tears. "Please, father, take it off. I want to see your face again." Wei Liang fell to his knees, hands trembling against the mask. He pulled, tugged, his nails tearing. For an instant, the wood loosened. Malin gasped. She swore she saw her husband's true eyes flicker through, wet with sorrow. But the mask shrieked. The sound split the night, sharp as steel against stone. Flames burst from the cracks in the boards, licking upward, circling them. The boy cried louder, "Father, don't leave me!" A single tear slipped from his cheek, falling onto the scorched wood. Where it landed, the flame hissed, dying instantly. Wei Liang froze. He looked at his son. The tear, the small, trembling body, the love that refused to die. For a heartbeat he remembered, carrying him on his shoulders, teaching him lines of poetry, hearing him laugh in spring. "Son," Wei Liang whispered through the mask. "Forgive me." He tore at the mask again, screaming. This time blood poured from beneath, dripping onto the stage. His flesh peeled like bark, his voice breaking between man and demon. The boy reached out, tiny hands against the wood. "Come back, father." For one impossible moment, Wei Liang's face broke through. Pale, ruined, but his own. He smiled weakly, and then he vanished. The child collapsed, sobbing, as the mask clattered to the ground. Mei Lin rushed to him, clutching him tight. But when they looked again, the mask was gone, only ashes swirling where it had fallen. The boy whispered, "He was there. I saw him. He wanted to come back." Mei Lin could not answer. She held him close, heartbreaking, while the ruin around them groaned like a theater bowing for its final curtain. Yet those who passed the ruins later swore they saw something strange, a faint mark on the scorched boards, shaped like a tear. It gleamed in the moonlight, refusing to fade. Some said it was the boy's love, stronger than any curse. Others said it was only another part of the performance. I tell you this because love and sorrow are the sharpest mirrors. The child's tear revealed the truth. Wei Liang was still inside, fighting, but the mask hungered too deeply. And so, like all tragedies, it ended not with victory, but with a glimpse of what might have been. A face behind wood, a tear upon ash, in silence where applause once thundered. There comes a moment when the line between man and mask dissolves, and all that remains is the performance itself. For Wei Liang, that moment was not an ending, but a descent, an endless curtain call for an audience no longer of this world. The ruins of the theater stood silent after the night of the child's tear. Most believed Wei Liang had perished at last, his soul carried away with the ashes. But silence is never complete, where hunger still lingers. On certain nights, travelers passing the empty hall spoke of light flickering within. Some swore they heard the faint strike of wooden shoes against the boards, steady as a drumbeat. Others claimed to hear a voice chanting lines from forgotten plays, echoing through the burned rafters. Those who dared step inside saw something stranger still. Rows of seats filled with shadows, clapping soundlessly, their eyeless faces turned toward the stage. And at the center stood Wei Liang, or what remained of him. He no longer needed an audience of flesh and blood. The mask had given him a theater beyond time, filled with phantoms conjured from every soul that had ever watched him. They clapped in perfect rhythm, their hands striking in unison, their applause hollow and eternal. Wei Liang moved like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. His arms jerked, his voice roared and broke. His robes fluttered, though no wind stirred. Yet the performance was flawless, too flawless. Each line carried not only sorrow and fury, but the weight of damnation itself. The masked grin gleamed in the lamplight that did not exist. Its hollow eyes glowed faintly, and when Wei Liang turned, the shadows swayed with him, as if hypnotized. No script guided him now. He performed plays that had never been written, tragedies too vast for human words. His voice shifted from a whisper, soft as ashes, to a scream that rattled the beams. Each note carved itself into the wood of the stage, branding it with marks that pulsed like veins. He sang of betrayal, and the walls wept smoke. He cried of lost love, and the lanterns bled waxy tears. He laughed, and the sound echoed as thunder, though the night outside lay still. And always, always the applause roared. Some who witnessed it lost their minds. A merchant wandering, drunken to the ruin at midnight, was later found babbling in the street, his eyes wide and unseeing. He swore he had clapped until his hands bled, unable to stop. Another man claimed he saw his own dead father seated beside him in the phantom audience, applauding with hollow palms. Yet still others sought it, drawn by whispers, by curiosity, by the hunger that clings to stories. They entered and did not return. Mei Liang came once more, alone this time. She had sent their son far away to escape the mask's reach. With trembling steps, she crossed the ruined threshold, calling softly, Liang. On stage, he froze. Slowly, his head turned. The mask gleamed in the moonlight, its grin wide, its eyes burning faintly red. For a heartbeat, she swore she saw her husband beneath, the tilt of his shoulders, the tremor of his hands. But when he spoke, the voice was layered, human sorrow drowned in demonic triumph. You should not have come. The stage is not for you. Liang, she whispered, tears falling. I saw you once, behind the wood. I know you're still there. Please, stop. But the mask laughed. The sound was like fire eating through timber. There is no stopping. The play must go on. Wei Liang raised his arms. The phantom audience clapped louder. The floorboards shook. The walls trembled. Mei Liang covered her ears, but the sound pressed into her skull, relentless. She fled into the night, heart shattered. Behind her, the applause followed, echoing long after the ruin had disappeared from sight. From that night onward, Wei Liang belonged wholly to the mask. No longer husband, no longer father, no longer man, only performer. Some said he was cursed to reenact his life endlessly, each play a distorted reflection of what he had lost. Others believed the mask had devoured his soul entirely, leaving only a shell animated by hunger. But I believe both are true. The demon performed, yet within the hollow wood, Wei Liang wept. One final tale remains. A group of villagers, desperate to end the haunting, gathered with torches and oil. They vowed to burn the ruins once and for all, to scatter the ashes so no spirit could cling. They entered at night, their flames casting long shadows. But as they approached the stage, the torches dimmed, flickering weakly as though smothered by unseen hands. Wei Liang appeared then, stepping into the light. The mask gleamed, robes blackened but whole. He opened his arms wide, and the phantom audience roared to life. The villagers tried to light the stage, but their torches died in their hands. The mask's voice thundered, "You cannot burn the eternal. Fire is my curtain, applause my chains. Sit and watch." And they did. Against their will they sat, their eyes glazed, their bodies stiff, their hands clapping in rhythm. When morning came, only ashes remained. But in the seats, impressions lingered, as if dozens had sat there, their weight pressed forever into the wood. The demon's performance had no intermission, no finale. It devoured all who entered, weaving them into the phantom audience, binding them to the play that never ended. Wei Liang had become what he once longed to be, unforgettable. But in becoming so, he lost everything else. I tell you this because applause is not always blessing. Sometimes it is hunger disguised as love. Sometimes it is the sound of a man being consumed, clap by clap, until only silence within him remains. And in that silence, the mask laughs still. They say every performance must end. But what if the curtain refuses to fall? What if the applause never dies? Then the play ceases to be art. It becomes eternity's prison. Wei Liang's tale did not end in fire, nor in silence. It ended in something far stranger, a truth that still drifts like smoke through the ruins of the old theater. Years passed. The theater remained a skeleton of charred wood, avoided by villagers, whispered about by travelers. Grass grew between its stones. Rain battered its beams. Yet still, no one dared dismantle it. They said that those who carried away even a splinter of wood later found themselves haunted by applause in their sleep. But the mask was never lost. One night, a wandering scholar came through the province, collecting folklore and forgotten relics. He had heard whispers of the cursed performer who never died, and curiosity drove him into the ruins. By lantern light, he searched the collapsed hall. Dust swirled around him, carrying faint echoes. At last he found it, half buried in ash, gleaming as though carved only yesterday. A wooden mask, unburned, untouched, smiling. The scholar lifted it carefully, marveling at the craftsmanship. A relic, he whispered, unaware of the faint warmth that pulsed beneath his fingertips. He carried it away. Some say he sold it to a collector in the city, who placed it on his wall among other treasures. Others say it found its way back to a traveling troupe, gifted as an antique. No one knows for certain. But what is known is this: the mask never decayed, never cracked. It always returned, waiting, and with it returned the whispers. As for Wei Liang, no body was ever found, not even bone. But those who gazed long enough into the mask swore they saw something within the grain of its wood, faint lines like a face pressing outward, a pair of eyes blurred but sorrowful, a mouth forever frozen in a plea. It was him, his features, carved into eternity, trapped behind the grin. I once spoke to a man who claimed to have glimpsed it. He said he placed the mask upon his face for only a moment, as a joke among friends. But when he looked in the mirror, he saw not his own reflection. He saw Wei Liang, eyes wide with desperation, lips mouthing words he could not hear. The man tore the mask away in terror, but afterward he confessed he still dreamed of applause every night. So perhaps this is the truth. Wei Liang never escaped. His body was consumed, his soul imprisoned. The mask did not devour him completely. It preserved him, like an insect in amber, forever displayed, forever remembered. And in that, his wish was granted. He wanted to be immortal, to never fade from memory. The mask gave him exactly that. But immortality is not always a gift. Sometimes it is the cruelest curse. There is one more detail. When Mei Lin grew old, long after her son had grown and left the province, she returned once to the ruins. She stood before the blackened stage, lantern in hand, and whispered into the emptiness, "Liang, I forgive you." The wind stirred. For a moment she swore she heard a sob, faint and broken, rising from the earth itself. And when she turned to leave, her lantern flickered. She glanced down. Upon the stage, glimmering faintly in the dust, was a single tear. I tell you this because legends are not meant to comfort. They are warnings, reminders carved into story. Wei Liang sought applause, and he earned it, forever. But in the end, what remains behind the mask is not glory, but a face fading into wood, a man begging silently for release. And the mask waits still, for another stage, for another hand, perhaps even for you. Thanks for watching the whole video. Please give me a like and subscribe to the channel to watch more interesting stories.